Good morning and welcome back to my channel. Today we are going to continue our discussion on the General Application and Implementation Directives Guide 2025. I am Yava. Last week we had a discussion on the general overview, unique provisions around consent, around the various tiers of major processors and controllers. We talked about the schedules, which are 10 in number, and uniquely, we said with some of the schedules, this gives a very simplified way to aid data protection officers and, in fact, data protection compliance organizations to effectively implement the Act. This indeed is a beautiful document. It is a beautiful document, a good place to start. So today we're going to be taking a deep dive into some of the articles like we said and promised last week. I hope you've subscribed to this channel. If you haven't subscribed, what are you waiting for? You should subscribe, like, share, put on your notification, because we are going to be taking the provisions of this directive article by article today. Hopefully we should be able to touch around 7 of the articles, and then next week we'll come back and touch some more until we are completely done with the articles of this directive. It is very important because really everyone is a data subject at one point or the other, and it is very important for us to support the protection of our privacy. So today we'll continue with the discussion on the article, starting with Article 1, which is titled The Objectives and Application of the Directive. The directive is targeted at every data subject within the borders of Nigeria, every Nigerian citizen, whether they are within the borders, whether they are outside the borders, and then even non-citizens of Nigeria who are within the borders of Nigeria, irrespective of their immigration status. The provision expects that the rights of data subjects at every point in time will be prioritized. And then it gives some explanations in line with how this should be done. And this is also in line with the Universal Declaration of the Human Rights of 1948, amongst other conventions. Article 2, which is titled The Material Contexts of Data Processing and Priority of the Act, focuses on the fact that the Act is within the exclusive list of the Constitution. And what is the implication of that? The implication is that unlike issues that fall within the concurrent list that require the state houses of legislation to domesticate them before they become effective, issues within the exclusive list do not have to go through that. So as soon as this act came into effect, it is applicable to every Nigerian citizen, irrespective of where they are located within the country. So irrespective of where your organization is located, the provisions of this act has you covered. So if your business or the nature of your business warrants the processing of personal data of your clients, your employees, the list goes on and on. This act applies to you, and you need to begin to implement its provision. And then Article 3 remedies duplication of multiple regulatory frameworks around data protection, and it emphasizes the fact that the Nigerian Data Protection Act is supreme, and whenever there is a conflict in the provisions, the Nigerian Data Protection Act will take precedence. Article 4 talks about the Commission collaborating and cooperating with other public authorities for the purpose of achieving the obligations of the provisions of the Act. And then Article 5 is a unique one. It talks about evaluation of the exemptions to the Nigerian Data Protection Act. Last week, we outlined the categories of organizations that are exempted. We talked of faith-based organization, community-based organization, we talked of multiple government organizations, among others. However, despite that exemption, there is now an exemption from the exemption, I would say. And what does that mean? It means that despite being exempted from some of the obligations of data controllers, these sets of controllers or processors are still obligated to carry out certain obligations. And some of those obligations are within Section 5, Part 5 of the Act. But within the Part 5, some are included, some are excluded. Which are included? Section 24 is included, and that is processing personal data in line with the principles of data processing. Section 25 is included, processing in line with lawful basis. Section 32, designation of a data protection officer. Section 40, when there is a breach, you must send out notification. And then Part 6, which has to do with the rights of data subject, must also be included. Then which ones are excluded? Section 26, which has to do with consent. Section 27, which has to do with provision of information to data subjects. Section 28, which has to do with data protection impact assessment, which is DPI. They are excluded. So whether or not you are filing and all of those responsibilities, you are still required to respect the basic rights of the data subject whose data you are processing. Article 6 is titled Data Processing by Individuals for Household or Personal Purposes. We know that the Act basically excludes this, but there is a little tweak in line with the guideline. The guideline emphasizes that anyone processing for personal or household purposes shall still respect the privacy of the data subject and will be held accountable for any conduct which they carry out that puts data subjects at risk. And some of such conducts are outlined, such as granting access to contacts on phones through software or digital application, sharing or transferring personal data to anyone or platform for any reason, lack of duty of care in handling any device which stores personal data, verbal or written disclosure of personal data, unauthorized access to personal data of any person. So while it's okay for you to process individual data for household or personal purposes, when it comes to putting individuals at risk, you will still be held accountable. I don't want to begin to give practical examples now. Then Article 7 talks about compliance measures by data controllers and data processors. So if you are a data processor or a data controller, you need to sit on this particular article. It has 23 whole sub-articles from A to W. You want to digest this one very, very well. From registration to conducting compliance audits within 15 months, that's for new organizations. Remember, I mentioned this last time, to, permit me to remind you, have you subscribed to this channel? You can't afford not to, and put on your notification button so that when we come back next time to discuss further on the other articles, you will not miss out. You can't afford to miss this. You know why? We are all data subjects. We need to all contribute to the protection of our rights. We need people who are data controllers and processors to know we have rights, and we know our rights, and we need them to do what? Respect them. So data protection In fact, let's just say it's everybody's business. And that's why we are having this discussion. So everybody will be on the same page. Because if you don't go to your employer, for instance, or someone you have a business with to call their attention to the need to respect your right, they may be unaware. I've spoken to several data controllers who are still unaware that they are data controllers. So it may take you as a data subject to get them informed. Let's go on to some of the compliance measures required from data controllers and processors. C talks about the various categories of the major data processors and controllers of major importance and the need for them to file before the 31st of March each year. And then D and E talks about the need for the obligation to comply with various schedules of compliance and then conduct semi-annual data protection reports within 6 months. F talks about monitoring and evaluation and maintenance of security systems to preserve confidentiality, integrity, and availability. Then G talks about the need to prepare schedules on organizational-wide internal sensitization and trainings. Then H talks about the need to identify all their obligations under the Act. I talks about the need to appoint data protection officers. J talks about review of their policies. K talks about publishing their privacy notice. L talks about providing privacy and cookie notices at their homepage on their website. M talks about ensuring that the privacy policy and notice is transparent and appropriately provided on platforms and wherever they are taking data. N talks about the need to develop and circulate an internal data protection strategy or policy and then have a basic checklist to help their member of staff and every other relevant personnel who has to deal with personal data understand what their obligations are. O talks about the need to conduct data protection impact assessments. P talks about the need to notify of data breaches within 72 hours. Q talks about the need to notify data subjects immediately they have observed a breach. R talks about updating agreements with third-party processors. So where an organization is having their personal data being processed by different organizations, they need to continually review the agreements. And then S talks about the need to design systems and processes to make data requests and access seamless for data subjects. So this has to do with the DISA, the data subject access request process. We always emphasize that where a data controller or a data processor has not started practicing responsible data cycle management, it is always a problem when they are faced with a DISA. So that is what S is talking about. T talks about designing processes to enable data subjects to easily correct or update their personal data. That is also part of DISA. So you want to make it possible. You see some websites, no data protection officer contact. So if I want to correct my data or I want to unsubscribe or I want to do whatever with that organization and there's no unsubscribe button, no means of contacting data protection officer, how do I then correct my data? How do I update? How do I notify them of whatever rights I want to enforce? U talks about designing systems and processes to enable data subjects easily transfer their data to other platforms. This has to do with data portability. And then V talks about at least within 6 months of commencement of business, and then at the minimum of an annual basis, personnel must be trained on data practices. And W says clearly explain the compliance process to data subjects, including the right to lodge a complaint with the Commission. I think this would be a perfect place to stop our discussion today. Like I said, data processors and data controllers need to respect the rights of data subjects and then stay compliant with the provisions of the law. Article 7 helps to achieve that. We are going to continue this discussion from Article 8 next week to cover at least maybe between 7 more or 10, and then be back by next week to continue until we are done with this, because I know that um, dealing with a 117 pages document is not easy for anyone at all. But I'm sure with the way we are having this discussion, it will make it easier to understand, appreciate, and implement really. I hope being here today has been worth your while, and I hope it has been helpful in any way. Feel free to contact us if you really want to have further discussions or you want us to support your organization in implementing a healthy, robust data protection system. Yes, we are very glad to have that discussion with you. I hope you've subscribed to the channel. We look forward to having you back here with us next week to discuss further on the general application and implementation directives. Once again, I'm Yava, and I'm glad to have spent my time with you today. Looking forward to having you next time. Bye.